So the institutions that we've learned from are the British Jesuit Province, the British Library, Cambridge University Library, Chetham's Library in Manchester, the De Morgan Foundation, Gothic Textiles, the Harris Museum, John Rylands Research Institute and Library, National Museums Liverpool, Manchester Art Gallery, Stonyhurst College, Tooley House Museum and Art Gallery in Carlisle, and Wigan and Lee Archives. And it's the first time that the stuff from Wigan and Lee has been lent, so we're really pleased about that. It's still uncatalogued, I think that you'll see there, but it's here. I mean, this is an example of the British Library case. So we wanted to emphasize the strength and the world-class quality of Blackburn's holdings. And anyway, where this is the, yeah, as I said, the BL case, and I think it all holds together and stands up really well. What we decided to focus on for this exhibition is the nature of Gothic with regard to the place and status of the natural world. Firstly, with regard to medieval manuscripts. The Lux manuscripts of the medieval period were decorated with verdant borders. So flowers, leaves, trees and vines are used to create the impression of a natural border, enclosing the words on the page. We trace the influence of the floreate border of the decorated medium page from the height of its development in the 15th century, and this manuscript is a really well-known example of this. It's called the Bedford Psalter, and it's sort of a national treasure, and it's really amazing that they agreed to lend it. People that I know in the world of medieval books couldn't believe they lent it, so yay, it's here. So enjoy the evidence suggests to us that this sort of floral border was something that was really important to people in terms of what they thought of as a book. So when the invention of movable type happened in the middle of the 15th century, when Johannes Gutenberg began to print books, they made sure that the books that they printed looked like this as well as they could do it. So a book had to sort of have its sort of decorative mise-en-page for it to be considered like the proper thing, if you know what I mean. These are called incunables. That's the Latin, which means in the cradle, incunable. And basically, scholars refer to that with regard to the cradle of printing. So you can see this is a printed book, not a manuscript. So a manuscript is totally made by hand. The printed book, though, has got all the sort of accoutrements that you can see in that late medieval book that was made, about 50 years before that. So it's got its border, it's got its sort of rubricated, decorated initials. Anyway, so it kind of looks like a manuscript. The influence of Islamic art was really strong throughout the Middle Ages. Of course, there's lots of conflict with the Crusades, etc. There was also lots of trade going on. And you see there's a really strong influence of Islamic art in medieval art. And you'll see that in the show as well. This is a manuscript from the John Rylands. It's a 15th century Quran. It's in several volumes, and you can see the decorative border there. It's not quite as sort of floreate, it's more abstract, and that varies with these Islamic manuscripts in terms of how the community wanted to interpret the teachings of Islam, whether that was sort of, whether that interpretation allowed the use of drawings of the natural world, or whether abstract art that's not imitative of the natural world is permitted. But this is just, what's incredible about this book is that you see the main display script in Arabic, but then I don't know if you can see, but there's also very tiny letters, 2 layers of them underneath the Arabic script, and those are in 2 different languages. It's one of the languages is Persian, and the other one is an Eastern Turkish dialect. So this book is intended for, lots of communities, not just sort of people who could read Arabic. The art of the Middle Ages, it loses its it's replaced by further trends and developments, of course, as time moves on. But in the middle of the 19th century, there is a revival of medieval aesthetic and medieval crafts, and that's led essentially by John Ruskin, following on with William Morris, the pre-Raphaelite artists, and the arts and crafts movement. So this is Burne-Jones. There's in the next room you can see it. It's quite a small painting. Burne-Jones loved the idea of the Sleeping Beauty, and he painted it again and again and again. This is a really interesting ensemble. It's painted on vellum, which is a parchment animal skin, and it's what the medieval manuscripts were written on and painted on. So Ruskin is really going like full throttle medieval with this. So he's got the climbing beauty in her sort of, in the forest of thorns. She's surrounded by a frame, and then the picture, of course, is framed as well. Anyway, it kind of says a lot about the enthusiasm for the Middle Ages in terms of practice and also in terms of theme and aesthetic. So they were producing art that was produced using traditional methods, and also Morris keeps the Islamic influence from the Middle Ages really strong in his art, and also you'll see other artists as well are using this. So particularly in the press movement, which produced books by hand. This, of course, is a really famous strawberry thief. We have an original sample of a strawberry thief in the next room, which is really quite amazing. Ankia and I were up in Carlisle, to the Blackburn Museum, and they got out these huge cardboard boxes, and inside the boxes were like these fabric samples from the 19th century. And it's like, if you were thinking about using, one of these new sort of quite cutting edge, you can't imagine the strawberry thing was ever cutting edge, but believe me, it was. If you wanted to use one of these in your house, they would send you a box of samples. Like, you still can get fabric samples, of course, today, but these are huge. And so you would just lay them around your house like on furniture on the wall, see if you liked it. But these never got sent back. As the textiles books, there was also a lot of interest in making ceramics. This is made by William de Morgan, who is a really good friend of William Morris. When Morris was working at Merchant Abbey, creating new sort of organic dyes, that his friend William de Morgan was working on ceramics. And you can see there the real sort of medieval-esque kind of theme. He learned the art of luster glazing, and this is an Islamic technique. It comes from centuries and centuries before. De Morgan learns it, and he starts using it, and it creates this huge enthusiasm for this kind of glaze. It's really iridescent, and when you look at this stuff, it just sparkles. One specific aspect of the exhibition, and that is florography, which is the use and the intended meaning of specific flowers in medieval manuscripts, as well as in the astonishing example of English embroidery made by their cousin Catholic, Helena Wintour, whose father was executed for his role in gunpowder. We use flowers to mark occasions, to show sympathy, to celebrate success, wish farewell at a funeral, to welcome a baby, etc. And some flowers retain really specific meanings for us. So red roses still indicate romance, lilies might indicate purities, delicacies, innocence. I'm sure you can think of lots of other examples. In France, chrysanthemums are used to decorate graves, and plants are traditional at Christmas, what they're used to setting from Celtic traditions with the perceived preternatural ability of these evergreen plants to sustain their colour and vitality. The use of flowers is a powerful and really ancient practice. The first example of this that's been discovered is in a Bronze Age grave from about 4,000 years ago in Fortivia in Scotland. There's a bunch of meadowsweet that was left in the grave, and the thing is, you immediately want to think, oh, it's sentiment, it's love, it's remembrance. But the archaeologists have also pointed out that meadowsweet has sort of like pain-killing qualities. It's sort of like an organic aspirin, and that could have been the purpose, that it was put in the grave of this young woman. Perhaps it was, to ease her pain in the afterlife. We just don't know. But anyway, the flowers are there, so we can see that it's really part of our history as human beings. In the Middle Ages, the meaning of flowers was very specific, and this was in keeping with how medievals read their world. The world was very definitely the creation of God, and everything could potentially be interpreted as God's intent. The practice of decorating medieval books with these floreate borders evolves from the 12th century onwards, and it reached its most developed phase in the 15th century, which is where most of the examples that you'll see next door come from. So these are mostly religious texts, so the Psalters, the Book of the Psalms from the Christian Bible, or books of hours, which are basically prayer books. And they're made for very wealthy people, aristocrats, and one of them, King Henry VIII, one of his books, is in there. And so, of course, he's a royal. We think another one of them was made for a Norwegian queen, but we can't be absolutely certain. I kind of believe it myself. So, all of the books are decorated with floral borders, which serve a variety of functions. But the primary function of these borders is to enhance the religious experience of the person that's using the book. Sometimes the borders had animals or humans or monsters or grotesques with animal features, but that's not consistent. Sorry, that's Henry VIII's book, and we show the cover to this book, which is actually a printed book, but on the cover you can discern that there's a frame to the decoration. The center of the decoration is Henry's arms, and it's a floreate frame. And here's an example of some of the grotesques I was talking about. This is one of our earliest examples. You see the frame letter B. This is the beginning of one of the Psalms. It's in Latin. So you've got the big B there, and underneath it, you've got the rest of the Latin phrase. So it's B, Altus Vir. That means blessed is the man. It's the words of the first psalm. And this is really strange, but in the Romanesque period, there was this trend for putting, it's called white lion decoration. In the middle, these swirls, you see these little sort of legs sticking out and paws. Sometimes there's a face in the middle. And they're white lions, and they like to just have bits of them peeking out from beyond the swirls. Why did they like this? We have no idea. But anyway, it's quite amazing, and you can see also some of the grotesques, some of the weird monsters that they put outside the letter. That every single one of these books was made completely by hand. So that means somebody prepared the parchment, somebody made that. Manuscript in Latin, does anybody know what that means? Manu is by hand, scripta, written. written by hand. That's all it is. Manuscript. So it's all, it's not, the printing doesn't exist, except in China. Doesn't reach Western Europe for quite a long time. So I talked a little bit about how early printed books looked like manuscripts. So we've got lots of evidence that this idea of how a book should look persists for a very long time. So I talked about parchment, and then the book would have been written by hand by a scribe, and this was a specialist skill that, that people had. So you had parchment maker, you had the scribe who was copying from, was not making this up, believe me, he was copying from another text. Then you had somebody who, other people with specialist skills, people who would draw the illuminations. There were people who added the coloring to the letters. There was a whole separate industry of people who bound the books. So there was a lot of skill, there's a lot of components, so these were really, really, really expensive objects. The reading of a book is not something that you see lying around in somebody's house in the Middle Ages. They were really unusual objects and treated with a lot of respect. Most medieval people also, remember, are illiterate. Most people can't read. So even the people who would commission these books, some of them were sort of quasi-literate. They would have someone read it to them or explain it to them. The books were used, well, they were intended to be used for religious devotion. But we also have evidence that some of these books were really used for showing off. It's like, look what I can buy. You know, yeah, I can afford this. That sort of thing. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But as this society changed in the 12th into the 13th century, it becomes much more urbanized. People begin to make money through commerce as opposed to through sort of working on the land, the feudal system. So book production moves away from monasteries and into urban centers like Paris, London, Oxford, where there are people who want books, there are people who can afford books. And also you've got the beginnings of universities in those towns. So you've got people studying medicine in Paris, you've got people reading philosophy and all sorts of other stuff at Oxford, and you've got the law schools in Bologna, and students need books, and some of those students were willing to spend. The language of these books is Latin. The language that people spoke was Middle English, or Anglo-Norman, which was a mix-up of Old French and Anglo-Saxon. And the language of the court was French. So it's a really complicated kind of linguistic atmosphere. But you didn't need to understand Latin to or to be able to read it. To be able to enjoy and use these books. And that's part of the strength of the visual programs. I'm going to start with this book, which is the Lupi Psalter. The Lupi Psalter is a book that nobody knew about until about 5 years ago. This is a 15th century book, and it was basically inherited by the family that this book had been in for hundreds of years. And the guy who inherited decided, actually, 2020 is lockdown, I think I'll just vlog this. So he decided that he didn't want it, he'd rather have the money. So, and that's totally fine, I'm not judging. But anyway, so this book was going to come up for sale. And so word got out in the community, you have to get sort of permission for these things to be sent overseas. So if it was going to come to auction, there's a possibility that somebody could tip up and buy it, could go overseas, or could go into, a collector's vault and it'd never be seen again. money was raised and it was saved for the nation, and we've got it next door. One of the really unusual things about this book is that it's in its original binding. So most books, the binding wears out over 700 years or so. This book, maybe because it was just like in the family library or something, it survives in its original binding. It's red velvet, which is incredible. Those sort of brass things on those bosses on the cover, those were used so that when you open the book, it didn't clank down on the velvet. It's protected, and it's also protected from other books in storage. This book was decorated by an artist who we call the Master of Edward IV. So he's called that because he's anonymous. Nobody knows this guy's name. It's really, really unusual for medieval artists, especially artists in books. So Edward IV was king like off and on during the Wars of the Roses in the 15th century. For 1 year, actually twice, the second time, he has to leave because he's basically kicked out by Henry VII. It's like, whoops, you lost your kingdom. So just go to Flanders for a while. So he leaves, and while he's there, he somehow, we don't know how, comes into contact with this artist. And so this guy, we have no idea how how this happened, but Edward IV absolutely loves this guy's work. And he buys, we think, quite a lot of it. He definitely brings some of it back to England when he comes back to regain his kingdom in 1471. Whether he brought him or whether the guy just came over and thought this might be a good opportunity, we have no idea. But anyway, several of his books are in the royal collection, and we know that those books belong to the king. So anyway, the thing about the Master of Edward IV is the incredible sort of clarity and the vivacity of the colors. So this guy's working with completely organic pigments. He's also working with gold. And they're just these beautifully sort of, they really pop off the page. And he also uses something which is called, it's really popular in the Low Countries, called a scatterboard. So what he does is he basically, he makes it look as if those flowers have just been like dropped in the border. And in some instances, I'll show you in a second, they actually look like you can pick them up. We think that this book belonged to, well, we know it belonged to this guy, but he wasn't the first owner. He's the second owner of the book. And this is Sir Thomas Hushon Lucas, who is a secretary to Jasper Tudor. Anyway, he's a powerful, rich guy. And he puts his own arms and those of his wife in the book, but they're not part of the original decoration. So we think that the book's made for someone else, and then the book is sold or maybe taken by this guy. We don't really know, but in the book, he has decided to put his own symbols. So those are his arms at the bottom there. That's not original. He's had those painted in for himself. And you'll also notice that he also has made sure that there are lots and lots of red roses in this book. They're not part of the original decoration. They're added, and you can see that they're painted on top of other stuff. So there are two reasons why he would put those roses in there. Reason number one, which is a more typical medieval reason, is that when they saw a red rose, they think, okay, yep, Christ's sacrifice, blood of Christ, crucifixion, yep, I'm there. That's what it kind of meant immediately to the medieval mind. It also meant, in terms of politics, you all know, the red rose of Lancaster. That's where this guy's from. So he's putting it out there, and he's emphasizing his place, his origin. He's proud of it. I'm pretty convinced it's a political statement, but anyway, it's interesting to have it in a prayer book. The other thing about this book that you'll see is that it's huge. So this is not a book that's designed for someone to like pray with. This is a book that you put on a big lectern somewhere, maybe in a private chapel or in a church, and other people come in. It's a sort of a public space. They look at the book and they go, wow, unbelievable, yeah, you know. But then also, what else do you see? You see the big red rose. So it's, you know, it's important. It's sort of, books could work in lots and lots of different ways, and they still do. Okay, sorry, just going back to look at the flowers. So here's, this is from the same book. This is the Lucas Soldier. This is a scatterboard. So they just look like he's just dropping these hyper-realistic flowers and the other things that go with gardens, like insects and stuff, onto the border. But these all have meanings. So the sort of moth, the sort of butterfly there, with the dark one over there at the top, that has to do with, you see that when you think of Christmas. You think of something being reborn. It has to do with salvation, the afterlife. The daisies, innocence, purity. That brings you to mind of the Virgin Mary, and other examples of religious devotion and purity. Also, the campanile there. That also, that colour is the color, that color blue. They associated with the Virgin Mary. She's always depicted in a blue, vivid blue cloak, and that is a symbol of fidelity, faithfulness, a sort of everlasting devotion. So it's all these flowers. They all have meanings, and they're really specific. They're not just, you know, a still life. They're redolent with meaning. This is also by the master of it. You can see that the master's original, the roses that he's using here, they look quite different from the ones that have been banged into the Lucas Soldier by different artists. The strawberries are a really interesting one. The strawberry, have any of you ever seen wild strawberries out when you're walking around? Yeah. The strawberry's got a tripartite leaf. So in Christian symbolism, Father, Son, the Holy Ghost. So that's one thing about element of the strawberry. The other thing is, sorry, it's kind of gross, but the medieval mind was, you know, it wasn't a delicate mind. Those are reminiscent of drops of blood coming from Christ's wounds on the cross. So yeah, got them in there. And then the white rose as well. So somebody who wasn't a Lancastrian probably wouldn't have been all that keen on the white roses, so this didn't go. So white roses, again, that's purity. And again, you can see the blue flower up there to the left, and that's also the Virgin. And you can see this nice sort of, the Virgin's robe is always that wonderful sort of electric blue, and the flower there. Also, yeah, the pansy, that tricolored pansy, you can guess, of course, the three colors, you know, obviously I'm not the biggest. And so they're interpreting all these things as deliberate symbols in the world, placed there by their Christian God. So this is 108. And so, yeah, kind of look at the whole layout there. The song reads, O Lord, hear my prayer. Let my cry come unto thee. Turn not thy face from me in the day when I am in trouble. Incline thy ear to me. In what day soever I call upon thee, hear me speedily. For my days are vanished like smoke, and my bones are grown dry like fuel for the fire. The symbolism of flowers, which you'll see in all of that stuff, is is also central to traditions of English embroidery. English medieval embroidery is really prized across Europe, and it's known as Opus Anglicanum, English work. There are incredible technical skills and innovative designs, which were created by medieval women, and they sometimes also were the patrons of it, like they paid for the work and also participated. So it's made using the finest components, dyed silks, gold, silver, threads, jewels, etc. And the making of it is part of devotional practice. And like this was designed, and many of the surviving medieval fabric is designed to be worn during the performance of the Catholic Mass. Symbolism, as we've seen in the manuscripts, is also really key to these garments. So we've got roses, lilies, the brazen orb of the Christogram IHS, which is an abbreviation of the name of Jesus written in Greek. All that would have been fine for medieval Christians, if they were literate or not. They couldn't read the words, they could read the flowers, they could read the symbols. This is the Alleluia chasuble. It's meant to be worn by priests during the celebration of Mass. So this is made by Helena Wintour. Helena Wintour's father, as I've said, was one of the people who was involved in the gunpowder plot. He was hung and drawn and quartered in the most horrific way. And so she's his daughter. Lots of other members of the family died. She ends up living in the family house, basically on her own, which is this like big Tudor house just outside Kidderminster. She decides, sorry, I am not giving up my faith. I'm going to keep going. And in secret, she and a couple of her friends make these incredible, I mean, really amazing embroideries. So it's an act of faith, but it's also a very dangerous act of defiance. If Helena would have been discovered making these things, she would have been executed, she would have been killed, just like that. She took a chance. You'll see in the vestments, sparkling jewels, precious and semi-precious. She took the jewels from her own jewelry box, so they're a wealthy family, no doubt about it. She takes her jewels, she breaks them up, and she sews them into that garment. So it's quite an incredible thing. And it is full of sort of post-medieval symbolism.